I collapsed in the frozen foods aisle at the Loblaws on Wellington Street, and the first person to hold my hand wasn't my son. It was a teenager in a Loblaws apron who couldn't have been older than 17, crouching beside me on the cold linoleum, telling me to breathe, telling me someone was coming, telling me I wasn't alone. My son was 4 hours away in Whistler. He didn't answer his phone for 31 hours. And when I finally woke up in the cardiac care unit at Ottawa General, the notifications on my borrowed phone showed me everything I needed to know. His Instagram story from that same afternoon, a ski run, fresh powder, a heart emoji, and the caption, "Finally offline. Best decision I ever made." Before I tell you what happened after I saw that, I need to back up, not all the way, just to the part that matters. My husband passed 2 years ago, November, the kind of grey Ottawa November that settles into your bones and doesn't leave until April. 41 years we were married. The house on Elmwood Crescent was ours together, bought in 1987 for what seemed like a fortune at the time and would be unimaginable now. After he passed, I kept it. Of course I kept it. It was where we raised our son, where we planted the garden in the backyard, where every Christmas morning happened for 30 years. People told me to sell, downsize, get a condo downtown, something easier to maintain. I smiled and said I'd think about it. I wasn't thinking about it. My son is 38. He lives in Vancouver with his wife and their 2 girls, my granddaughters, who are 6 and 8, and who I have seen 3 times in the past 2 years. He works in tech, something I've never fully understood, despite his many attempts to explain it. And his wife works in marketing. They are very busy people. They said that a lot. "We're just so busy right now, Mom. Things will settle down." They never did. The calls grew shorter after my husband died. In the beginning, my son called every few days, which felt like a kindness, though even then I could hear the distraction in his voice, the sound of him half somewhere else. By spring, it was weekly. By summer, it was whenever he remembered, which was not very often. His wife stopped getting on the phone at all. When I asked about the girls, I got short answers. "They're great, really thriving," as though my granddaughters were quarterly reports. I told myself what mothers tell themselves. He's grieving too, he's processing differently. He has a lot on his plate. Give him time. I gave him time. Time kept passing and nothing changed. There was a woman I met through my parish, St. Anthony's on Bank Street, where I'd been going for years. Her name was Hazel, not my Hazel, the one from that grief group, but another woman, older than me, maybe 74, who'd been through her own version of this particular kind of loneliness. She didn't say much the first few times we talked, just listened while I explained my son's schedule, his career, the time difference between Ottawa and Vancouver, all the very reasonable reasons why he wasn't more present. At some point, she put her hand on mine and said quietly, "You're doing a lot of work to protect him from his own choices." I didn't sleep well that night. There was also Priya. Priya had been my next-door neighbor for 6 years. She's in her early 40s, originally from Mississauga, a nurse at the General who worked long shifts and came home to water her tomatoes and feed the neighborhood cats. She'd been bringing my trash bins in since my husband got sick, without being asked, without making a thing of it. After he passed, she started leaving food on my porch. Not casually, not once or twice, but consistently, quietly. A container of dal, a Tupperware of rice pudding, a note that just said, "Thinking of you." I told her she didn't have to. She said she knew. So when I collapsed that Thursday in February, Priya was the one the hospital called. She was my emergency contact. My son was not. I'd changed that 18 months earlier after he missed my husband's memorial mass because of a work thing in San Francisco. And I realized, driving home alone from St. Anthony's in the snow, that I couldn't keep listing him as the person to call. He didn't know I'd changed it. The paramedics said it happened fast. I remember reaching for a bag of frozen peas, feeling a pressure in my chest that I initially assumed was anxiety, and then the floor coming up to meet me very quickly. What I remember after that is fragments. The teenager's voice. A woman saying she was a nurse and to please move back, the sound of wheels on linoleum. Then the ceiling of the ambulance and the cold and someone squeezing my hand. I had a cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, but close enough that they used the word serious multiple times, performed an emergency procedure to place a stent, and kept me in the cardiac care unit for 4 days while my blood pressure did whatever it was going to do. Priya was there when I woke up. She was sitting in the chair beside my bed with her winter coat still on, like she'd come straight from her shift and hadn't wanted to leave long enough to put her things away. Her eyes were red. When she saw me open mine, she let out a breath like she'd been holding it since Thursday. "You scared me," she said. "I scared myself," I said, which came out more cracked than I intended because of the breathing tube they'd removed. She got water, found the nurse, asked the right questions. She'd already spoken to the cardiologist. She had notes on her phone. She knew my medication history better than I did in that moment. She was, in every way that mattered, the person you want in a hospital room. I asked about my son. Something shifted in her face. Not dramatic, just a careful stillness. "We called him," she said. "The hospital called him. I called him. 31 times between the two of us. 31 times. He's in Whistler," I said, because I remembered that from somewhere. A text earlier that week, maybe. "He was in Whistler," she said, and held out her phone. The Instagram account was his wife's. Public because she ran it like a brand, all carefully curated photos of their life in Vancouver, the girls in matching outfits, artisan coffee, occasional mountains. There were 7 posts from the past 3 days, my son and his wife at a restaurant Friday night, the girls in ski helmets Saturday morning, a sunset over the mountains Saturday evening, golden and enormous, captioned "disconnecting to reconnect." A video of my son laughing at the bottom of a ski run, snow in his beard, looking younger than he had in years. Posted Sunday afternoon while I was in the ICU. While the hospital was on its 31st attempt to reach him, they had Wi-Fi at the resort. That was obvious. You don't post 7 times over 3 days without Wi-Fi. I handed the phone back to Priya without saying anything. There wasn't much to say. The evidence was right there, time-stamped, with little hearts from strangers in Calgary and Toronto and Vancouver, who had no idea that the man laughing in those ski videos had a mother in a hospital bed in Ottawa who'd been trying to reach him for 3 days. "Best decision I ever made," I said, remembering the caption. Priya didn't say anything. She just sat there with me in that room full of beeping machines, which was exactly what I needed. My son called on day 3. By then I was sitting up, eating hospital soup, watching snow fall outside the window. His voice came through the phone, breathless and strange. "Mom, I just saw, I didn't know. Our service was so bad up there, we were basically offline the whole time. I looked at the 7 Instagram posts time-stamped across our 3 days of calls. I'm okay," I said. "I'm coming. I'll book a flight tonight. I'll be there tomorrow. I'm being discharged tomorrow. There's no need." A pause. "What?" "No, Mom, I want to be there. The acute part is over," I said. "I'll be home by tomorrow afternoon. Priya is going to drive me." Another pause, longer. "Who's Priya?" That was the moment, I think, when something shifted for me. Not anger, not exactly. Something quieter. He'd been my neighbor, my person. The woman who left rice pudding on my porch and sat in uncomfortable hospital chairs for 4 days. And my son didn't know her name. He had no idea who was in my life. He hadn't asked in a very long time. "My neighbor," I said. "She's been here the whole time." He came to visit 2 weeks later. Not immediately, not urgently. 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday, flying in from Vancouver for what I understood, by the end of the visit, was not actually about me. He arrived with his wife, without the girls. "School days," he said. "Couldn't pull them out for a trip." I nodded. I'd been hoping to see them. We sat in my living room, the room where his father and I had watched 30 years of hockey night in Canada, where his childhood photos still hung on the wall. He made tea, which surprised me, and they asked how I was feeling, and we talked about my recovery for perhaps 15 minutes. Then his wife said, "We've been talking and we're worried about you living here alone." I waited. "This house is a lot to manage," my son said, "especially after what happened. I've been managing it fine, but if something happened again, there's Priya next door." "Priya isn't family," his wife said, and I thought of Priya asleep in the chair by my hospital bed, her winter coat still on. "She's been more present than family," I said, and meant it without cruelty, just as a fact. That landed badly. I could see it. His wife's jaw tightened. My son looked at the window. "We're just thinking about your safety," he said. "There are some really nice retirement communities near Vancouver. You'd be close to us, close to the girls. I don't want to move to Vancouver, Mom. This is my home. I've lived here for 37 years. Your father is buried 20 minutes from here. I'm not moving to Vancouver." We moved on. Or we tried to. But there was something beneath the conversation, something I couldn't quite locate, a reason for this visit that hadn't been stated. I felt it the way you feel weather changing. Something was coming. After they left, I stood at the window and watched their rental car pull out of the driveway, and I couldn't have told you why I felt so uneasy. The answer came 4 days later in my mailbox, a thick envelope from a legal firm in Vancouver. Inside, a cover letter addressed to me, explaining that my son had engaged this firm to assess options regarding my property at Elmwood Crescent in the context of estate planning and future care arrangements. There were several documents. A draft power of attorney, broad in scope, covering both financial and personal care decisions. A list of questions from a physician regarding my current cognitive and physical capacity. And a brochure, glossy and careful, for a continuing care community near Burnaby, British Columbia, called Heathwood Gardens. The cover letter suggested I review these documents and consider signing the power of attorney proactively before a future health event makes the process more complicated. I read the letter 3 times, then I sat down at my kitchen table and looked at my husband's photo on the shelf across the room. The one from our trip to Cape Breton in 2008, the summer we drove the Cabot Trail with no real plan and stopped wherever we felt like stopping. He was laughing in the picture. He was always laughing. I thought about what Hazel had said. You're doing a lot of work to protect him from his own choices. I wasn't going to do that anymore. I called my oldest friend, a woman I'd known since we were 22 and working the same summer job at a park in Gatineau. She'd been my witness at my wedding. She'd sat with me the night my husband died. She listened while I read her the letter over the phone, and when I finished, there was a silence. Sylvia, she started, then stopped. Sorry, wrong name. I almost laughed. He sent this 4 days after visiting you, she said slowly. Without talking to you about it, yes, while you were still recovering from a cardiac event. Yes, another silence. Then, what do you need? What I needed was a solicitor. I'd used the same one for my husband's estate, a careful and very competent woman named Gwen Albright, whose office was on Metcalfe Street and who had known our family for 15 years. I called her the next morning. She was quiet while I explained. When I finished, she said, "Has he spoken to your physician?" "I don't know. I'm calling my doctor next." "Good. And I want you to know this kind of thing is more common than people realize. Adult children, estate assets, aging parents, I've seen it before." A pause. "I want to ask you something directly. Is your son a good person who is misguided, or is this something more deliberate?" I thought about that for a long time, long enough that Gwen said my name to check if I was still there. "I think he's been telling himself a story," I finally said, "that I'm declining, that I need to be managed. I think it started as worry and became something else involving a house worth considerably more than it was in 1987, yes." "All right," she said. "Let's talk about what we can do." What we did was this. Gwen drafted a comprehensive will revision, a power of attorney naming Priya and Gwen jointly as my representatives, and a letter from my cardiologist and family physician confirming my cognitive capacity in unambiguous terms. We also contacted the Vancouver legal firm and informed them politely and without drama that I was fully capable of managing my own affairs and did not require unsolicited estate planning from parties with a financial interest in the outcome. I chose to leave everything to my granddaughters in trust, managed by Gwen until they turned 25. Not a cent through their parents. Educational funds, yes, but with clear restrictions. The house, when I eventually chose to sell it, would go into the trust as well. I left a small bequest to St. Anthony's and a larger one to a hospice charity, whose work I'd seen up close when my husband was dying, and which had been quietly extraordinary. I left my son a letter, not in the will. A real letter, handwritten, which I sealed and gave to Gwen to be delivered after everything else was settled. Priya got the car. My husband's old Subaru, which she'd admired many times and which I was keeping in the driveway mostly out of sentiment. That decision made me feel better than almost anything else. My son called 2 weeks after Gwen's letter reached the Vancouver firm. "Mom, that letter from your lawyer?" "I received yours first," I said. "From your lawyer," a long pause. "That was just, we were trying to be proactive, to plan ahead. You planned ahead without asking me. You engaged a firm to discuss my property without mentioning it during your visit. You sent a power of attorney to my house 4 days after I had a cardiac event. We're worried about you. You weren't worried in Whistler. You posted on Instagram while the hospital was calling you 31 times. The number sat there between us. Neither of us spoke for a moment. I have 31 records of attempted calls, I said. I'm not guessing. His voice, not cruel, not even angry, something smaller. Mom, I didn't know it was that serious. You didn't answer to find out. The silence that followed was different from other silences in that conversation. Heavier. I don't know what to say, he finally said. I know I didn't either for a long time. I love you. I have loved you your whole life. But I've spent 2 years trying to fit myself into the edges of your life where you'd still allow me, and I'm not going to do that anymore. Mom, I'm not punishing you. I'm not being vindictive. I'm just making decisions that reflect reality. The reality is that Priya has been more present in the last 2 years than you have. The reality is that your daughters barely know me because you haven't prioritized that. The reality is that when I nearly died in February, the person who held my hand was a 17-year-old in a grocery store apron, and you were taking photos of ski runs. I heard him exhale, not defensively, something more like grief. I don't want to lose you, he said quietly. You have me, I said. I'm right here. I have been right here. A pause. What you're going to lose is the inheritance you were planning around. I can live with that if you can. There was a long silence then. Are you going to sell the house? And there it was. Goodbye, I said, not angrily, just clearly. I'll call you when I'm ready. That was 4 months ago. The house is still standing. I decided not to sell after all, at least not yet. I had the back garden redone last spring, finally planted the roses my husband always wanted and never got around to. Priya helped me choose them at the nursery on Carling Avenue, both of us arguing cheerfully about colors for 45 minutes before settling on a deep red that she said looked like courage, and I thought looked like stubbornness. And we both agreed those were more or less the same thing. The girls came to visit in April. Priya helped arrange it, through a conversation I'm not going to explain in detail, but which involved a lot of patience and a phone call from my granddaughter's school counselor, who has apparently been a quiet advocate for their grandmother for some time. They stayed for 4 days. We baked. We walked along the canal. The older one asked me about her grandfather, and I told her stories for an hour while the younger one fell asleep on the sofa under the quilt my mother made in 1971. When they left, I stood at the front window and watched until the car turned the corner, and I thought, that's what I was protecting. Not the house, not the money. Those girls who I almost didn't get to know, who almost grew up thinking their grandmother was just a voice on a phone that their dad sometimes forgot to return. My son and I have spoken 3 times since February, not warmly, not coldly, carefully. There's something unresolved between us that neither of us knows how to touch yet, some version of each other we're both still adjusting to. I was the mother who made room for everything and asked for very little. He got used to that. Now I'm something different, and he doesn't know what to do with me. I find I'm more comfortable with that uncertainty than I expected. Hazel came to the rose garden last week. She brought wine and we sat outside until it got cold enough that we had to pull on our coats. And she said, "You look different." Different how? She thought about it for a moment. More like yourself. I'm 67 years old. I survived a cardiac event on the floor of a Loblaws. I watched my son choose a ski trip over a phone call, and I watched a neighbor choose an uncomfortable hospital chair over her own bed. And I finally understood the difference between the people who are required to love you and the people who simply do. The roses came up last week. Red, just like Priya said. I cut 3 of them and put them in the blue vase by my husband's photo, and I sat in the kitchen with my coffee and thought, this is mine, this life, these choices, this particular morning light. After 41 years of building a home for other people, I'm learning to build one for myself. It turns out I'm quite good at it.